Stoning is a punishment that leaves no single executioner behind. No blade to polish, no scaffold to dismantle, no signature on a death warrant. It is a sentence written in silence and carried out by many hands. Stones are not sharp, they are not fast, they do not kill cleanly. That is their purpose. The suffering they inflict is neither immediate nor personal. It is collective, and that is where the punishment begins. Where most methods of execution rely on a single point of failure, a trapdoor, a noose, a lever, stoning removes the clarity of responsibility. It fragments death into a sequence of minor acts. A thrown stone does not feel like murder. It is too small, too ordinary, too far removed from the final breath. But when hundreds are thrown, when the weight of a crowd gathers in rhythm, when the body begins to collapse inward from repeated impacts, it becomes clear that the stones are only messengers. The executioner is the community itself. Historically, stoning has no fixed geography. It is not the custom of a single land, religion, or regime. It emerges where law and morality are fused with the will of the many. In ancient Judea, it was encoded into religious texts. In the early Islamic world, it was preserved through hadith and jurisprudence. In Europe, it appeared less often in formal codes, but lingered as a form of extrajudicial punishment, especially where the machinery of justice could not reach quickly. Even in societies that condemned it, the act would surface in times of unrest, panic, or piety, as if latent in the human impulse to punish not just the transgression, but the threat it represents. Stoning is often described as a public act, but that word, public, fails to convey its true nature. It is not merely performed before others, it requires them. The punishment is not a performance for spectators. It is a ritual that makes perpetrators out of witnesses, and in doing so, it conceals guilt beneath the cloak of shared righteousness. When a stone is thrown from a crowd, it becomes almost invisible. No one knows whose hand struck the fatal blow. That uncertainty is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Unlike the sword or the fire, stoning offers no grandeur. There is no spectacle in its form. The condemned is not raised on a platform or chained to a stake. More often, they are lowered into a pit, into the ground, into the dirt. The body is partially buried to prevent escape. Hands tied, eyes left open. There is no need to mask the face. The stones will do that in time. The setting is ordinary. A courtyard, a field, an empty space between walls. There is no special architecture, no tool of death, only the ground beneath and the stones above. The stones are chosen with care. They are not so large as to kill with a single strike, nor so small as to leave no injury. They must be heavy enough to break, but not enough to end. The goal is not mercy. The goal is participation. A swift death would deprive others of their share. A drawn-out death ensures involvement. One stone breaks a rib, another splits the brow. A third shatters the hand raised in a final gesture of defense. The act is slow because it is shared. Silence often hangs over the scene. It is not the silence of solemnity, but of something deeper, a quiet agreement that the act, while terrible, is necessary. That silence is the sound of internal justifications, of gazes turned inward, away from the blood, away from the twisting spine. Few shout, fewer cry. The noise comes from the stones, from the collapse of tissue, from the breath that stutters and chokes and fades. When death finally arrives, it is not greeted, it is noticed, briefly, then ignored. The logic behind stoning is built not just on punishment, but on ritual purification. The offense is seen not merely as a legal breach, but a contagion, a spiritual corruption that must be purged through communal rejection. The throwing of stones is symbolically a cleansing. Each strike removes the stain. Each impact restores balance. In this way, stoning serves as a kind of exorcism, one that externalizes guilt and affirms the moral order of the group. It is less about the one who dies and more about the many who remain. This collective function is perhaps what gives stoning its endurance. It binds the crowd together in a shared act of justice, or vengeance, or fear. The difference is often unclear, but what remains constant is the distribution of responsibility. No one person bears the weight. No one soul carries the burden. In stoning, the cruelty is democratic, and yet it is not equal. The condemned does not vanish with dignity. The body is often left behind, disfigured, slumped, partially buried beneath the very instruments of death. The face is sometimes unrecognizable. The eyes, if they remain, stare nowhere. And still the stones rest around them, inert now, as though they had never moved. Some are stained, some not. There is no way to know which stone did what. The evidence of the act is present, but the evidence of the actors is lost. There are no gravestones for those who die this way, no rituals of mourning, no official records beyond a decree. The burial, if it happens at all, is crude. The earth is disturbed only long enough to hide the corpse, not to honor it. And in the days that follow, life resumes. The market reopens. Children play nearby. The blood fades beneath dust and footsteps. Memory bends around the space where it happened, not to remember, but to forget. Stoning offers its greatest violence not in the moment of death, but in the normalization of death by many hands. It teaches that punishment is not only to be seen, but to be done, that to belong is to participate, that the moral order must be enforced not by laws alone, but by stones cast in unison. It is a death designed not to warn the individual, but to condition the group. Over time, the justifications evolve. The religious imperative softens into cultural norm. The legal requirement becomes an unwritten rule. In some places, it vanishes altogether. In others, it lingers in the margins, denied publicly, enacted privately. Whether sanctioned by courts or carried out by mobs, the result is the same: a body in the dust, a silence in the crowd, and a landscape that pretends nothing happened. But the stones remain. They do not rot. They do not decay. They are not like rope, which frays, or fire, which fades. They are not like swords, which must be sharpened, or poison, which must be prepared. Stones endure. They are always there, waiting. Not because they desire to be used, but because people do. To understand stoning is to understand what happens when the act of killing is made impersonal, when death becomes a civic duty, when morality is measured not in restraint but in action. It is to see how cruelty survives not in the hands of monsters, but in the decisions of ordinary people who believe themselves righteous or afraid or obedient. It is tempting to look away, to say it belongs to the past, to imagine ourselves beyond it. But every time a crowd punishes where a law does not, every time violence is shared so that no one feels guilty, every time silence protects the group over the individual, the stones are there again, metaphorically or not. Because stoning was never only about stones. It was about power, about fear, about what a society is willing to do in order to maintain its own image of purity. And above all, it was about the terrifying ease with which the many can erase the one. If you've stayed with this reflection until now, I ask you to stay a little longer. In the next part of this chronicle, we will descend deeper into the machinery behind the ritual, the way the crowd is shaped, the stones selected, and the silence maintained. We do not look away. We do not forget. Subscribe to the Punishment Chronicle, and if you wish, leave a thought in the comments below. Your words, unlike stones, can build instead of destroy. The body is not supposed to die too quickly. That is one of the unspoken rules of stoning. It is a punishment that must be seen, felt, absorbed by those present. A death that is swift teaches nothing. A death that is slow reminds everyone. In this way, stoning is not only about the condemned, it is about those who remain. It is about their memory, their complicity, and their silence. The crowd plays the central role. Without it, stoning cannot occur. This is not a solitary act of execution. There is no hangman behind a hood, no axe poised above a block. The moment belongs to the mass, to the eyes that watch, the hands that lift, the arms that throw. But the mechanics of the ritual are not chaotic. They are structured, deliberate, and in that structure lies its power. A stoning begins long before the first stone is ever thrown. It begins with judgment, formal or informal. Sometimes it is declared by religious authority, other times by custom, or in the absence of law, by fear and tradition. The condemned is often accused of violating not only a statute but a norm: adultery, apostasy, blasphemy, betrayal of communal honor. These are not always crimes with evidence. They are accusations that destabilize the collective. And the collective responds by hardening itself, by casting out the one who threatens its integrity. The sentence is passed. There may be a trial or merely a gathering of voices. Sometimes it happens in the open, sometimes at night. What matters is not the formality. What matters is consensus, or the illusion of it. A group must believe that what is about to take place is not murder, but correction. That belief is what separates ritual from crime. Once the sentence is known, preparations begin. The condemned is not placed on display. They are often placed beneath, in a pit, shallow enough to stand but deep enough to trap. The ground restricts movement. The hands are bound. The eyes remain open. Blindfolds are rare. Pain must be seen. Escape must be impossible. Dignity is not preserved. It is irrelevant. The stones are gathered. They are not random. They are selected. Tradition forbids the use of stones so large they would kill with a single blow. That would be execution, not stoning. Nor may the stones be too small like gravel. Those would humiliate but not destroy. The correct stones are roughly the size of a fist, large enough to injure, small enough to require repetition. Dozens must be used, sometimes hundreds. The crowd assembles. They do not rush. They arrive in waves: men, women, elders, sometimes even children. Their presence is not passive. It is expected. Participation may be voluntary, but refusal to appear can itself become a mark of disloyalty. No one wishes to be seen as soft. No one wishes to appear as though they stand apart from the group. The first stones are sometimes cast by the accusers. In some traditions, this is mandatory. If you bring a charge, you must be willing to begin the punishment. It is meant as a safeguard against false accusation. But in practice, it serves as justification. Once the first stone is thrown, the rest are freed from doubt. No one wants to be the only hand left at their side. And so the storm begins. The first strikes, rarely kill. They shatter skin, bruise muscle, fracture bone. The condemned cries out or does not. They sink further into the pit. Their knees collapse. Their shoulders twist unnaturally as the body struggles against its restraints. There's no single blow that ends it, no climax. The process unfolds like a collapse, cumulative, uneven, relentless. There is no fixed duration. A stoning may last minutes or much longer. If death does not come soon enough, a final stone may be used, heavier than the rest, to crush the skull or chest. But this is a last resort, a concession. The point is not mercy. The point is process. The act must be felt by those who inflict it. The psychology of the crowd is what sustains the ritual. When many act together, individual responsibility dissolves. No one can say they alone caused the death. No one must carry that weight. Each stone is only a fragment of violence, but together they become fatal. This distribution of guilt is precisely what makes stoning possible and enduring. It is difficult to imagine a single person beating another to death with stones. It would require resolve, cruelty, and proximity. But when the same act is divided among dozens, it becomes possible, acceptable, even virtuous. The crowd does not feel brutal, it feels justified. The presence of others affirms the necessity of the act, and so the line between justice and vengeance disappears. Silence plays a vital role. It surrounds the act, fills the spaces between impacts. There are few shouts, no laughter, only the sound of stones against flesh and the shifting of feet. This silence is not born of reverence. It is a byproduct of shame, fear, and ritual. No one speaks, because to speak is to acknowledge. Better to focus on the motion, the rhythm, the next stone in hand. Some in the crowd may not throw. They may stand, watching, paralyzed. But their presence is part of the ritual. To see and not intervene is a form of assent, and that too is by design. The ritual needs witnesses. It needs memory. It must leave behind not only a body, but a message. The aftermath is rarely discussed. The body is disfigured, sometimes buried in place, sometimes left for animals. There may be no name inscribed, no grave tended. The purpose of the punishment was not to create a martyr. It was to erase, to remove the one who challenged the order of things. And in that sense, the stoning is only complete when the community forgets what it did. Yet the forgetting is never complete. The stones remain. The pit remains. And the silence, that same silence, follows those who participated. It finds them in the markets, in the fields, in the places where they once greeted the condemned with kindness. It clings to them, a memory they cannot name, but which settles heavily in their chest when they pass the place it happened. In some cases, stoning become a tool not of justice, but of control. Accusations are weaponized. Communities target the vulnerable, the different, the defiant. A woman who speaks too freely, a man who leaves the faith, a child born of the wrong union. The ritual remains the same. The justifications evolve, but the logic never changes. Remove the threat and restore the illusion of unity. This illusion is fragile. It requires repetition. Each act of collective punishment reinforces the fear that keeps the group together. And so, stoning becomes not an exceptional act, but a recurring one. A performance that must be restaged to remind everyone of their place. Its violence teaches obedience. Its cruelty demands silence. Even in regions where stoning has been abolished, condemned, or forgotten, its spirit lingers. The crowd remains. the impulse to punish collectively, to divide guilt among many, to harm without consequence. These impulses survive. They are seen in mobs, in public shaming, in social exclusion, in every act where the many turn against the one, not for justice, but for control. The physical stones may be gone, but the metaphor endures. What is most terrifying about stoning is not the act itself. It is how easily it is accepted, how quickly the mind adapts to its logic, how normal it becomes once enough people agree to look away. This is not a barbarism of the past. It is a mirror held to the present. The ritual teaches that guilt can be shared until it vanishes. That violence becomes tolerable when performed together. That silence protects and questioning isolates. These lessons do not disappear. They are passed down, sometimes unconsciously, generation to generation. They become embedded in the ways communities enforce belonging, punish difference, and mask cruelty as virtue. And always, the stones are there, in memory, in metaphor, in warning. What begins as a punishment ends as a philosophy, one that reveals how thin the boundary is between justice and violence when the crowd becomes the law. If you've come this far, then you already understand why we must continue. In the final part of this chronicle, we will confront what stoning leaves behind, the ruins it carves into a society's conscience, the pain that outlives the punishment, and the stones that are never truly put down. Join us for part 3. Subscribe to the Punishment Chronicle. Leave your thoughts below. If you choose to speak where others remain silent, some punishments end with the final breath. The rope goes slack. The axe strikes true. The flame exhausts its last ember. But stoning leaves no such clarity. Its echoes continue after the body is still, after the crowd has dispersed, after the pit has been covered over and the stones return to the earth. The punishment does not vanish. It remains, embedded in the places it occurred, in the habits of those who watched, and in the silences that follow for years or lifetimes. What lingers most is not the death itself. It is what the death permitted. Stoning does not only destroy a person, it recalibrates the limits of violence within a community. It teaches what is possible, what is acceptable, what can be done to one who has been cast outside the circle of protection. And in that recalibration, something shifts, not just in law, but in the soul of the society. The stones are not swept away, not all of them. Some remain, scattered like bone around the place of execution. There is no monument, no name etched into wood or stone, nothing to honor, nothing to mourn. Just the same earth, the same silence, and the quiet shame of those who now walk past without speaking. It becomes easier over time to act as if it did not happen, and so the forgetting begins, not out of peace, but out of necessity. But forgetting is never complete. Memory persists in strange forms, in stories told vaguely to children, in warnings passed from parent to child, in the way a certain square remains empty at dusk, even when the air is still warm, in how people speak of justice with hesitation, unsure of what the word has meant or still means. Stoning is not merely a historical event. It is an atmosphere, a weight in the bones of a community that has once permitted the many to kill the one. Some will say it was necessary, that the punishment was just, that the law, the faith, the tradition required it. These justifications are not lies. They are the architecture of survival. They allow those who threw to sleep at night. They allow those who stood by to believe that silence is not complicity. They allow the world to move forward without the burden of too many ghosts. But justice does not require erasure. And when punishment demands silence in order to survive, it ceases to be justice. It becomes something else, something older, darker, harder to name. It becomes ritual, control, a kind of fear made sacred. The idea behind stoning was always purity, that by removing the transgressor, the community could remain intact, unsullied, that moral corruption could be excised like disease. But what is rarely spoken is that each stoning carries a cost, not only for the one buried beneath the stones, but for every person who helped to place them there. The community is preserved, yes, but it is preserved by damaging itself. The weight is distributed. The guilt is shared. But the damage is real. In some societies, this damage hardens into ideology. The stoning becomes mythologized, sanctified. It is no longer remembered as an act of violence, but as a symbol of moral strength. Songs may reference it. Texts may justify it. Heroes may emerge from its shadows, those who cast the first stone or who led the judgment. In this way, the violence becomes virtue. The punishment becomes identity. And yet, even within these narratives, there are fractures, quiet doubts, stories that don't align, memories that resurface when the stone paths are walked alone. It is in these moments that the ghost of the punishment stirs, not as vengeance, but as a question, a voice that asks what was gained, what was lost, who remained silent, still. Over time, the mechanics of stoning change. The formal rituals fade. The laws evolve. The stones are put down, but the pattern repeats. The many still turn against the few. The righteous still name the outcast. And punishment still disguises itself as unity. The crowd still gathers, not always with stones, but with words, with laws, with silence. The execution now takes other forms: exclusion, disappearance, exile. But the logic remains. One must be removed so that the rest can remain unshaken. What stoning reveals, perhaps more than any other form of punishment, is the fragility of communal morality. How quickly it can turn from protection to punishment. How easily a society can mistake uniformity for peace, and how swiftly fear can become law. The condemned are not always guilty. That has never been a requirement. Guilt is often assumed, shaped by rumor, prejudice, emotion. The crowd does not wait for clarity, it waits for permission. And once granted, the act unfolds not as a decision, but as a release. A collective exhalation of tension cast violently outward. In this, stoning is more than a punishment. It is a release valve. A moment when fear, anger, and insecurity are converted into action. The target may vary, but the mechanism is constant. Identify, isolate, eliminate, normalize, forget. The forgotten is essential. Without it, the cycle cannot continue. And yet, some memories resist. Some places refuse to be quiet. Some questions return again and again, like wind brushing over stones that were never removed. These questions do not demand answers. They demand attention. Why was this method chosen? Why must the crowd participate? Why is silence part of the ritual? Why do the stones remain long after the body is gone? These are not historical questions. They are human ones. They are the reason stoning, though nearly abolished in law, persists in spirit, in acts of group violence, in collective abandonment, in the shared harm done to those who fail to conform. To see a stoning is to see what a society fears most, not crime, but disruption, not immorality, but disobedience. The punishment is not only for the act committed, but for the refusal to pretend. And so, the stones fly. What can be said then when the punishment is over? There are no apologies. There is no memorial. The crowd does not return to mourn. The pit is filled, the dust is settled, and life resumes. But something remains altered, an unspoken agreement, reinforced by blood, that this is what happens to those who step outside. And so, fear becomes a teacher. It teaches silence. It teaches obedience. It teaches that moral certainty can be more dangerous than cruelty because it does not recognize itself. It teaches that the most enduring violence is the kind shared by many and spoken of by none. In the end, the punishment leaves behind more than a broken body. It leaves behind a community that has rehearsed cruelty together, justified it together, and now must live together in the aftermath of what it did. That is the true legacy of stoning, not just death, but complicity. The stones never rot. They do not decay. They are not cleansed by rain or sun. They rest where they fell. They endure. And when we pass them, literally or metaphorically, we are faced with the question they carry. Would I have thrown too? There is no comfort in asking, but there is meaning, because the stones do not speak. They wait. And it is only by confronting the silence around them that we begin to hear what the punishment has left behind. This has been the Punishment Chronicle. If you've stayed through all three parts of this reflection, thank you. We do not speak for the dead, but we refuse to let the silence speak for them either. Subscribe if you wish to walk with us further into the histories we often bury. And if you have thoughts, leave them below. Here, you are allowed to speak.